Boy, look at that array of stuff. And in my mind, it sort of shows an evolution too, you know, especially in my world. It wasn't too long ago that to me was a quintessential work saw. And what this is a XPW top end on a Jonsered 2171. Muffler mod, a little compression increase, you know. Great running saw, good torque. And I would run that with a 24-inch bar, and that was pretty much my work saw, felling saw at the time. And I had 572s, it's just I wasn't quite ready to give up the 372 class. But I eventually did. And my first 572 class was really the 565. I ran that for quite a while, and I was doing felling with it. Went back and forth between that saw and another 372 class saw that was kind of hopped up for a while. And then begrudgingly went into the 572s. And I had bought a brand new one, and it had heated handles, and I still haven't put a lot of time on it. And the problem for me was, at the time, it was a little bit heavier than this saw, and it wasn't a whole lot more, you know, powerful in the way I wanted to make power. So I kept going back to the saw that I was familiar with. And what happened was a couple things. One, I got introduced to that big giant G395, but also the type of wood that I was felling changed. And while I always had maples, I ended up getting a job, and also in my place, where I had a whole bunch of big maples. When I mean big, I mean between 24 to 30 inch diameter around the waist trees. And I went back to my 572s. I had built this one, and it was a little bit, well, actually it's the one that's on the shelf now. Where is it? It's back here. Anyway, I built one and found that it actually was more productive for me, you know. I also bought a 585. They're sitting up here somewhere. Yeah. So here's the 565. This was the first 572 that I purchased new back in, I don't know, like 2018 maybe. Whenever they first came out. 17, 18, I can't remember. But this was the first one I built to be a work saw. And in the background, it was really the workhorse for a couple of seasons. I ran the big blue saw, which made a lot of power. It was heavy. When the camera was off, I went back to this one. And the big blue saw pretty much spoiled me. Bought this is the 585. And then effectively had $1,000 saw that performed like the $300 saw that the G395 was. That's what it boils down to. Same kind of weight, same kind of power. Although I have to say I really like that saw. You know, the 28, that's a really good saw. But this turned into the gold standard for me. And of course it's modified. It's not stock. And that's the rub here. That one's stock and it runs good the way it is. I don't think I'd want to change it much. But stock with the 572, I had to do a couple of things to make it run the way I wanted to, because I was now spoiled because of that big blue G395. You know? So, a couple years later, I'm up to here. But I've learned, you always evolve, that power matters. And a couple other things is I got a little older, and I went from a 24 to a 28 inch bar, pretty much because I figured out it was just a more efficient way for me to cut the way I wanted to get the trees on the ground safely. A modified version of game of logging. And what would happen is, from one position I could do more bore cutting. But the other thing that happened was, because of how I was cutting that wood, I would have to reposition while the chain in the bar was still in the tree, right? So I come off the throttle, have to come back on the throttle, and that kind of moved me away from like saws like this one right here, which is a 62cc saw, and even from a stock 572 back into my G395 and my modified 572, you know what I'm saying? This one doesn't have the same kind of punch at all. Those two are actually roughly the same. And this is a modified by me 562, which has a lot more punch in the bottom than a stocker does. Not a little, but a lot. But of course, there's quite a bit of grinding on that saw. That's not a stock saw, so it's really not fair. But I even did a video where I was running that on the big trees next to one of my 572s, but also next to the G395, and realized it just, you know, it's just, no, it just didn't have enough punch. It's like once you experience the power, the torque, you kind of can't go back, is where I'm at. So the point is that the definition of a work saw for me evolved with not just learning the different products that are on the marketplace, but also the type of trees that I had to drop. You know, when I was doing firewood, stuff like this saw right here was perfect. Fun, fast, loud, snappy. Kind of a bling saw. Great saw. If I was cutting softwood and pine, that would be fine. You know what I'm saying? But when I have to dip into the hard maples, and as the season turns, when we start seeing freezing temperatures, you know, I have to move to something with more power. So at this point in my life, this right here is a model saw for me. And the other saws in the market that would be in that class in terms of power and usefulness would be something like a steel, 462 or even a 500i. You know, that class. The 500i is a little heavier, but it's got power. This has got surprisingly good power, but it's in that class. You know what I'm saying? Weight, power, stuff like that. And that's a useful saw. This Dolmar, when it runs good, is right there, you know. My problem with it, and this gets into the discussion of what's a work saw, is what a pain in the neck it is to get that right. As it came in the box, it was useless in my mind. Totally useless saw. And we've changed ignitions, and I gutted the muffler, and it's got a different carburetor. And I'm still fighting with it a little bit. I think I've got a solution now that seems to work, where it's easier to start. But having to put that much time into it, if I put the same amount of time and money into, you know, the 572, I've got a fully modified saw for less money. That's the point. And the other thing that happened was, you know, I tried all kinds of different bar and chain combos. I went through the whole phase of light bars and Sugiharas and settled on the Oregon VersaCut for the 24-inch bars. That works pretty good for me. And the chain by Oregon's not bad, but the Husqvarna X cut chains, the C85 and C83 chains I've used the last few years out of the box. What it is, it may not win every cookie cut race, although they're not bad. It's the blend of how smooth they cut, you know, versus how fast they cut. And I do a lot of bore cutting. So having these tips that are kind of rugged on these X-Tough bars, but along with the characteristics of the C83 chain on that bar, I mean, I can just walk that bar around a tree, plunge cut, conventional cut, doesn't matter. And it doesn't kick back. It just cuts. And it just is a safer, faster, and it seems to hold up chain. And again, the only thing I see on the marketplace that's even close in the price range would be the steel RS chains. And this cuts faster out of the box. I've said this before. But those RS chains, they cut really good, and they seem to hold their edge a little better. Although I did a video a little while back where I just ran it just the way it was for a whole, 15, 18 trees, and then bucked them too. Bucked, I don't know, probably 25, 30 trees with it. and it was still useful at the end of all that, even though it was cutting through mud and dirt. So the C83 has proven to be pretty tough as well. So for me, I'm kind of a husky types. Yeah, I could probably jump ship and end up with a 500i or 462 with a steel light bar and RS chain and be pretty happy. But this works for me probably just as good, and I don't have as much into it. And at this point, it's not about the money, because I have enough money to buy pretty much anything I want. But the combination of me building these, but also just the way they run and how smooth they are, and I've just gotten used to the power characteristics. I keep gravitating back to the 572 every time I wander somewhere else. And so for me right now, I mean, it could be different next year. That really is the best package for me. Yes, I do miss my big G395. There's no doubt. A stock 395 OEM would be nice to have, but as I get older, the weight thing begins to creep into it. Plus, getting them started, they're a big displacement saw, and this has got enough power and it's easy to start. And the other thing is, it's a little bit better on the fuel, even than the Dolmar. So that's why I've settled on that as sort of like the gold standard. Now, I have to tell you that because I have a saw channel, I just can't spend all my time running 572s and telling you all the good stuff, right? Got to build a couple from time to time. I got to go back into history and run these to be interesting. But you're not going to see a whole lot of cookie cuts, because that really doesn't tell the story. It tells a story, but not the story about life with a saw. And the G395 with a 8-pin sprocket will eat one of these in a cookie cut race. And I'm sure that the bigger displacement steel will as well. But it's a balance of things that you got to look at that make a saw work for me. That's a beautiful little saw for what it is, but it doesn't have enough punch in the bottom. The lower part of the power band just simply doesn't have the displacement. So it doesn't have that initial hit that this one has, or the Dolmar has. And then the Dolmar might have more power. It's got more displacement, but it doesn't start quite as easily as this one. And it vibrates quite a bit more, And it's the combination of all those things. Whereas if the cookie cuts are in a reasonable range, where they're not upsetting me with the lack of power to get the chain started, and I can't push on the chain, stuff like that, well, then the power begins to matter. But when they're all in the same class of power and it's all useful power, the cookie cut is actually one of the least the least defining characteristics of the saw. It has to do with fuel usage, how easy it is to start. Does it make my hands numb? Is it too loud? Is it reliable? Is it reliable? Is it reliable? Does it start reliably? Does it start reliably? I can't say it enough. It's those kind of things that, to me, ultimately define what's the best saw for me. And right now, the 572 is it. Well, a 572 tweaked by me. I need to revisit that from time to time. So in my mind, there's your work saw from my perspective. There's one that's in development, and if I can make it start reliably, it's also one that would fit. This one's kind of come and gone, where I built a bunch of them, used them, loved them for general farm work. And, when I do like one or two big trees, but the rest of it, it's all, 15 inches and less, that's a fine saw. Tops, firewood, great saw. And this one's just obsolete, That one makes the same kind of power, but it's lighter. It has a lot more RPMs. Love it to death, this saw right here, but it's been relegated to being, an interesting saw, but not a work saw. And just like this right here, I'll run this on the channel and explain what it is, the history and stuff like that, but there's just absolutely no way I could spend a week in the woods with that saw and come out healthy. I might be able to do it here, but I'd be frustrated because I've had the experience with this saw. And you've seen me get frustrated with this one because I've had the experience with this one in that big blue G395, which was in fact reliable and easy to start too. So it's those things that add up, you know, and I see some of the other channels and, you know, it's not all one brand. It's like the drive on YouTube to come up with some numerical way to define what win is frustrating for me because I've been around this stuff for a long time. And yeah, for a person coming into it and doesn't have 20 years in the world of chainsaw, that's something that's easy to understand and to grab onto. Oh, he made a change and it's faster. Or I got a saw and I took it out of the box and it's 1 second faster on a 20-second cut than the competition, as if that's the definition of win. Another factor in my mind is, you know, long-term reliability. If I'm a guy, you know, with a successful business and a crew, something like a 565 makes a lot of sense because the initial cost is a little bit low. The performance is going to be as fast as they're going to actually cut. And they're really reliable. They're really durable. They're a rugged saw. They're basically a little bit detuned from a 572. They're not as expensive up front, but they got the same crank and bearings and stuff like that. So, you know, long term, it's a good investment because it's going to cut a lot of wood with a variety of skilled operators, you know, with different skill levels. And like my 572, it's going to start reliably pretty much every time. And auto tunes really help there. And the other thing is, I think it's beginning to play out a little bit, is like this saw right here is actually on its second life. It already went through a professional work cycle where the person who had this one right here in particular, basically they wore them out and they went to 500 eyes because we don't have a dealer anymore. And I'm sure they're very happy with that. But this one already had, you know, on the clock, 400 plus hours. Now I've already put 100 on it, and the other one, it's pushing 600 hours, and they're still going. The Husky's got a bad rap, and of course the way the propaganda online goes is if you're a purveyor of another brand, you know, you'll find something that's a statistical anomaly on one brand and turn it into as if it's all that way. And yeah, some of the 572s early on had some issues, but so did pretty much every other brand. It's just the badge of bad PTO bearings stuck with the Husky brand more than it did the other brands. But, you know, I've had enough experience working on, well, most of the major brands, and they're no more or less reliable up front with a new saw. You know, Husky, they pushed the boundaries a little bit with the 562. I've gone through that. But the 572, you know, when you look back at it now after several years, it's been a very, very, very rugged saw. They're a very rugged saw. And the things that kill them, it's a blessing and a curse, the fact that they spin the RPMs. The things that I see kill them, I've said it a bunch of times over and over, is, you know, the running style with a short bar or skip chain where there's not a lot of resistance on that motor, and it's always bouncing off the rev limiter. That's death to a saw like that. You know, you got to have enough bar or aggressive enough chain, or, you know, an operation style where you actually load the motor, keep it in its power band. So I always run 32 or 40 to 1. You know, I'll never put something smaller than a 24-inch bar, full house chain on it. That's just ridiculous. And I don't have any failures. And, you know, I put a lot of time on them. Same with this one here, is the running style I've seen people use in the past where it's just bouncing off the rev limiter all the time. You know, that along with a skip chain or a short bar, yeah, you'll eventually kill it. You know, adding heat to that PTO bearing, you'll eventually prematurely kill it. But in general, the 572s, even more so than the 562s, these things have been really pretty solid. And the 592, 585 series has been pretty solid as well, from what I can tell. And but my guess, and I said it early on when I first took one of these apart, you're going to see saws like this one here just like this one right here, years from now in somebody's garage, after they've gone through one, possibly two service lives, still being able to cut wood, you know. And I mean, these had electronic ignitions, and the type of things that would fail in a 572 would be the same kind of things that would fail in this one here from the 1970s, 80s. That's a 285. It has an electronic ignition. The potting material and the coils and stuff like that are still working today. And my hunch is, from what I understand from these, is it's the same level of technology. You know, it's just a little smarter, but those electrical components are going to last a long time. And the things that'll fail on a saw like this are the same that'll fail on this one. It'll be running lean. You know, the seals get hardened or something like that, sucks air, or the diaphragms in the carburetor. But just like this 285, these 572s are built pretty rugged. I guess that's my point. But it's driving me nuts. You know, I wonder if there's something that the wind's getting into. Well, I have stuff in the way, and I started looking at the property line, and I've avoided some of the trees because I was pretty sure that they were on my neighbor. And then I started looking and realized that I got a couple of very large ash that are on me, not on them, that I need to take before they're gone. One of them's down there, and one of them's right here. And if you drop a vector from where the fence is, that's actually pretty solidly on me. So I better take it. And right down there, there's one. Before I do that, though, I have to move this. I got to take this. This is hobby saw stuff. So I'll see if I can get one of the hobby saws to fire up and do this and not waste the chain on a felon saw.
Well, as you can see, it's actually pretty big. It wants to go right there, but I'd like to see if I can make it go just a little bit over here. There's some lower value maples, like the one right in front of me with the compromised the base there. Well, the next one over, it splits only like 6 feet up, so that will never be a saw log. So those are the trees I'm gonna let it hurt and see if I can drop it maybe to the right of that one there, maybe right down in there. If I can make it do that, that'll be nice. And I see there's another smaller ash right next to it, so if I can drop those, then it'll be easy for me to get down here with the tractor and pull them out. it did what it wanted to anyway. All right, let's see if it'll roll.